Hi guys, hope everyone's really well. Just thought I'd put a feature together on fin systems. It's basically Futures Fins versus FCS2, but it's a bit of an overview in fin systems in general, where they came from, the plus and minus of each system, what I personally like, and how they're actually installed. I'll try not to get too in-depth with the install because there's plenty of good videos out there on the install, but I just wanted to go over the systems and the benefits of each one and why you might choose one over another or not. Had a couple of questions asked on the site and I've replied fairly detailed, but since I've got all the boxes and the systems and I can actually show you, I might as well use some of the props and just explain how I see this myself. So back in the early dark ages of fins, probably before most of us were born, although I've seen plenty around, they actually used to glass the fin directly onto the board. There was no fin systems as such around anyway, so basically a fin would look like this, no tabs on it whatsoever. It would get glassed onto the board. After glassing, they would then glass the fin onto the board, cover it in resin, saturate it with cloth, sand it all up and sand the connection to the base and everything, and that was kind of like, unless you ground that back off again, that was the fin you were stuck with for the board. So if you didn't match the fin to the rider or the board very well, you didn't really have anywhere to move. So that's where fin systems basically came into play. So then it's probably good if I start talking about FCS, because these have been some of the early fin systems. So the early FCS1 fins, they were basically what they call a two-tab system. So these are the two tabs, and those two tabs would go into the board. This is actually a leash plug, but it tells the same story. So what you would basically have is you'd have these two plastic inserts that were basically, they drilled a hole into the board again after glassing, and they set these in and they glued them in, and then the fin would be able to slot into there, and the little grub screw held these fins on. Now that's FCS1. It was still a pretty good system, to be fair, and it's still widely used on some boards now. Some boards still haven't moved to FCS2. They're still using up the old FCS1 in some of the cheaper ones, or they're perfectly good, so there's nothing wrong with them. So that leads me nicely into early FCS1. You only had two little tabs, and it didn't give the fin a fantastic connection to the board, so you get a lot of wiggle going along in these other areas, especially when you move to like larger fins, or you were dealing with something like a keel fin, like this FCS2 version. You can imagine that with just these two little tabs on. There's not a lot holding it to the board really, so what you'd get is you'd get quite a lot of flex going on in the areas that weren't the tabs. Some of the benefits to that would be that it would be quite likely to snap the tabs off the fin rather than snapping the boxes out of the board. But you'd also see a lot of these little fin boxes, tabs, whatever you want to call them, you see a lot of these actually ripped out of boards on old boards. So it wasn't that difficult to rip these out of the board either. But then it also wasn't that difficult to put them in or put them back in. So again, good system. That was the early days. Everything's moved along since then. It used to be basically FCS1 versus Futures. So I always liked the fins in FCS1. They had some really good fins and templates because they had a lot of the big shapers on board. And Futures were in the early years. So the benefit to Futures was suddenly you had this system that was basically the connection to the board was almost the full base of the fin, so you had a really strong connection to the board, and they felt more solid, because like the old glass on ones would obviously have a very nice smooth stiff feel to them, and I think they still do have some advantage in some ways, because imagine if it was glassed on, you'd have this nice radius connecting the fin to the board, a bit like an aeroplane wing, so your actual coefficients of drag and friction and hydrodynamics and all that blah 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 would actually probably be a little bit better than these fin systems. But I think being able to change your fins out to ones that actually suit you is probably a way bigger advantage than glassing them on. So you will see some guys that still glass them on, like say it's a guy that rides an Almeric's board and he knows he likes a AM large and he knows the position he likes them in, they might still glass them on, although again, for traveling it's good to be able to take these out. So that was like FCS1 versus Futures. And like I say, the main advantage was this great base connection. And then Then FCS2 came along, and FCS2 kind of remedied the base problem by adding more length of base, but they also came up with this innovative method of basically being able to pop a fin. Basically the boxes, you can pop a fin in and out tool free. So basically when you put the fin in, you put it into the front nose of the box under a little tab, and then you just pop it down, and there's a little plastic roller inside this box and the titanium pin, and that just springs out into a groove and then drops back into this groove that's on the fin. I wonder if you can see. So on the rear tab of the fin, you'll see this little slot there, this little round nose slot, and that's what locks it in under the tab. Now that's a great system, and it makes it tool free, so it's very quick and easy to swap. The slight side note to that is I and many other people have lost the odd fin with this system, so luckily they also left the old grub screw slots, so I actually screwed them as well. So if you clip in and screw with these, you've got a great base connection, and you've also eliminated the ability of the fin to be able to wobble around inside the plug or the fin system, which is really great. So that's one of the reasons why I really like FCS2. Now Futures are generally a really good fit anyway. So Futures basically they kind of do the same thing but the other way. The back hooks under a little tab, and then the front locks down, and then you add this little grub screw. Now they're generally pretty good, but sometimes there can be a bit of wiggle in here, which you can remedy by just sticking a sticker down it or sticking a little plastic shim down it. So if you're using the fins a lot and you like the fins and there's a bit of wiggle in the box, which quite often happens when the boards are made with heat in the process. So like say a board's like a, more of a, I don't say a pop out, but like say they're a molded technology, or some of these really great indestructible boards like Torx and Bics and stuff, they're quite often made in a mold with heat, so these can change shape a little bit. So they're usually the occasions where you might get a little bit more play. So that's one of the slight downsides of Futures, is you can get a little bit of play in the box, and I quite like the fact that on FCS2 you can take that wiggle out by just screwing it in as well. But generally they're both really good systems, they're both good connections, they're both solid connections into the board, they've both got plenty of fins available in the range, and they're both great systems basically. So let's go right back to fin system install now. So basically it's the same with most fin plugs and leash plugs these days. Obviously, we're really talking FCS and Futures because they probably make up 90% of all fin systems out there these days, and quite rightly so in my opinion, because they're great fin systems and there's a lot of support for them. So most of these now, hopefully you can see this all right, they all rely on basically when your board's at the shaped blank stage, you're going to route a hole with a jig and a special tool into the board, and then you're going to grab your fin box and you're basically going to fill all this area up with I personally use epoxy, but it'll basically be, I think even some of the guys that are doing polyester resin and polyurethane blanks would still use an epoxy glue because it's just a strong glue to put in. So it's basically the same resin as you glass the board with. You add some filler that they call Q-cell, which basically just thickens it up a little bit. You put this in the box area, and then you push this fin system box into it, and it gets glued down, and you just check the cant angles and everything, and then this is glued in. Exactly the same with the SCS2. You cut a little slot there. They've both got these little lips. That are above the surface, so it gives something to glass over and sand back down. So once you've got this system in with the dummy fin, you glue it in, you check its angles, you let it set, and then when you come to glass the board, we put a reinforcing patch over the top of the fin box, and then we put another sheet of cloth over the board, which is obviously like your bottom layer. Say that's a 4 or 6 or whatever it happens to be for your bottom layer, depending on your glassing schedule. You put that over this fin patch as well. You saturate it all with resin, and you then carry on to do your hot coats, and then you sand back to expose the box again, and then possibly you do another hot coat or a little tidy up depending on what resins you're using. So basically, by the time you finish one of these box systems, this box has basically been routed out to a nice fit, so there's not much play in that. Then you've glued it in, so it can't really come out anyway, and then you've glassed over it with reinforcing patch and cloth and resin and the hot coat. So they're very strong systems. They do still snap and they do still come out, but they're extremely strong systems really, and they integrate with the blank really well. So you can see I've got two boards that I've made. Here's Futures one on my right, be your left. Yeah, that'll be right. The opposite is FCS 2 one here. So yeah, that's how the fin systems go in. That's actually, ironically, some of the leash systems are the same now. So this is Futures, which I really like. I'm sticking with these now, and an FCS. And basically, you do the same thing. You route a hole, you plop this in and glue it in. You glass over it, and you know the strength and chances of it coming out compared with some of the older systems where it's just got glue around it is they're going to stay in basically 99 times out of 100. They're going to stay in. People do pop them out. People do have leash plugs rip out. People have fin plugs rip out. People have fins snap in the bases. It happens. That's surfboards. That's surfing for you. So yeah, so that's how they're installed. Some of the differences between the install systems and the advantages. So I want to go into some of the differences now between Futures and FCS and why you might choose one over the other. So we've kind of been over this, but what I really like about the FCS 2 system is we've now got a fin box that is a clip-in if you need it to be a clip-in. It's got a very strong base connection again, which I really like. You can still screw it in as well, so that takes out any side play of the fin in the box after install. So that's why I really like this system. The fins that FCS make are very well researched, and the hydrodynamics are excellent. The production and finish of the fins is excellent. So those are all the plus sides to me. The other thing is you can still retrofit FCS 1 fins. So if you've got some of these old fins, or you're traveling somewhere and you're somewhere quite remote, someone might have one of these just sat in a garage somewhere that's another surfer, you know, they're quite readily available. And yeah, it's just a really good system, and it works. So that's the advantages. And obviously you've got the big shapers, some of the athletes on board. They make, you know, you can get your Julian Wilson fin, your Al Merrick fin, and all the rest of that. And I think that's great that they've got the backing of the shapers and the surfers, and it makes for a good market. Some of the downsides to FCS 2 that I see is, and fair play to them, FCS 2 have made this FCS 2 system and they've patented it, so it's only just getting to be the case that you can buy proper clip-in FCS 2 bases on aftermarket fins. So because of the patent, it was tied down for quite a long time that you could only get FCS 2 fins made by FCS. So that was kind of a lockout of the rest of the market. So that to me was actually a little bit of a downside, because there's quite often very good offers on, you know, you see like Captain Fin or Naked Viking or someone else, you know, there could be a really good offer on, and they're very good fins, or just a different template that you really like that isn't made by FCS. You know, you can't necessarily get exactly what you want at the price that you want in the box. One of the other downsides that we've said is if you knock these from the back and you've not screwed them as well, you can actually lose a fin, and they're not cheap fins, which is another downside. FCS they can be very premium price, but they're very well made. So it's like you do get what you pay for, and you know that FCS are only selling quality fins into their fin system, which again is kind of another plus. I think that's about the only downside for FCS 2. Right, so whilst we're between the two systems, I think it gives me a good opportunity to talk about one of the different ways the two different systems do something, and that's fin cant. Now, fin cant is basically the angle that this fin is already laid over to, and that's obviously similar to a car where the tires are towed in or out, or the wheels are towed in and canted basically so they can corner differently. So obviously on a surfboard, your toe is that fin angle to the nose, and your cant is this fin angle this way. Now again, a more aggressive fin angle will probably make the board turn sharper and faster, but it can also create drag. So both systems add cant in a different way, and they both use different standard cants, so it's actually something that's quite important to consider. I remember on Stab in the Dark All Stars, you had Dane and Geordie and Mick talking about the way they're saying, oh, the fins are set up different in different boards, and it's like, well, Geordie and Dane are sponsored by Futures and Mick's sponsored by FCS. So basically, the FCS system builds the cant into the plug. So these plugs are available in a 9 degree, a 5 degree, a 3 degree, and a 0 degree. So your 9, that's the cant this way basically. So 9 degree is your standard front fin cant that you'll find on most FCS boards. That's what most shapers would spec. And then the 5 is probably generally going to be a rear quad. You could use the 3 as a rear quad, and you could even use the 5 as a front fin. It's all about how much cant you want to change the way it turns or reduce drag. Obviously, if you've got a keel fin fish, you're not going to use 9 degree, well, you shouldn't use 9 degrees of cant. You should be sitting it a lot more upright and probably towing it in a lot less, because you want a fast drivey fin with less drag. So that's how FCS do it. And Futures actually build the cant into the fin. So you see this fin here has already got the cant built into it. So if it was flat, it's already, it's already kicked over. And Futures, now this is good, because this means whatever the shaper or fin designer wanted this fin's cant to be, he can achieve that cant, and no one needs to change the box. So if the box is already always set on 0 and the cant's built into the fin, you can change the cant on the fin that you buy. Well, you don't need to change the cant on the fin that you buy, because it's already in this fin, and it doesn't need to change the box to suit. So that's one thing that's worth considering. And the standard cants on Futures, I believe, are a little bit less than FCS. I believe like an FCS front thruster fin or general front fin is 9, and I'm pretty sure Futures is actually 6.5. So it's quite a wee difference there. Yeah, so just worth mentioning. So let's get into Futures, advantages and disadvantages of Futures, and just talk about how they work. So Futures, as I say, all boxes they've got 0 cant built into the box, and there's 2 different boxes and 2 different fins for Futures. So all front fins will be a 3/4 depth box, and all rear quads and rear fins will be a 1/2 inch depth box. So you can see the difference in the depth of those. That's just the way to do them, which is quite good, because obviously when you get to the rear fins, they're usually smaller and they don't need to be connected as strongly, but you're also getting thinner in the tail. So this gives it the ability to fit these into a thinner portion of the tail. If you're trying to fit these into the back end, they're getting towards, your routed holes would almost be going through the board. So yeah, that's that. So there's a 3/4 base front fin with a 3/4 base box, and here is a 1/2 inch rear quad with a 1/2 inch box. And as I say, on the Futures, basically it's a similar system. The tab there locks in behind the back. This pushes down, and you screw the grub screw in to keep it in place. Now, so one of the downsides to Futures is you can get a little bit of play in here, especially with boards that have had heat in the process. So as we discussed, that's one of the downsides. You can get a little bit of play in there. It's not a major deal. There's still a great connection, and they're still really strong. The plus sides to Futures are quite a few, to be fair. So what I like about the Futures is, say, back in the day, one of the big advantages was that these boxes were actually glassed in, and they had a really good connection, so they weren't going to rip out of the board. So that was like a real big advantage over FCS 1. But now the playing field's even between this and FCS 2. The main advantages to me for Futures are, obviously, one is that cant can be whatever the shaper chose that to be for the fin. The other one is your ability to put in fins from different aftermarket manufacturers. So again, if you go and buy a Naked Viking or a Captain Finco fin, it's into this proper, correct, full Futures base, and it's the same across the board. So there's quite good offers on some of those fins, and it really extends the range, because even now, like FCS2 have got a pretty good range of keel fins and twin and stabilizers. But if you go across the combination of Futures fins that they make themselves, and Naked Viking, and Captain Finco, and True Aims, and so on, their array of choice of fins is actually huge. So that's another advantage for Futures. Again, they're both well made. The box is nice and strong. They're available everywhere. Another thing to touch on is probably foils. Foil is the concave or convex that they put inside the fin or outside the fin, or whether it's a 50-50 or an 80-20, but basically it's for a lot of fins. FCS 2 do the same and Futures do, but quite a lot of fins have got a little dish or concave in this inside. They call it inside foil, and that can do a good job of creating lift and creating a loose board. Now, I really like the Vector 2 foils on the Futures fins, which is basically you have an inside foil at the bottom of the fin, and then that blends out to being flat at the tip, and I really like that. Whereas FCS 2, they usually go either flat on the inside or a full inside foil. So that's one of the things that foils are worth considering as well, but I definitely like that on the Futures. Both of them are really good for material selection. I quite like Futures ride system as well. They give you an idea of how stiff it is and what that's going to relate to in your board. They got some really good construction materials. You know, they've researched well. They've got like the Alpha series. A bit same with FCS. They got the Alpha series is like the, you know, similar to the Neo glass, so it's like a step up from the plastic, but it's not as bad as they used to be. They're pretty good, but it's a good price point. And then you can go to your standard performance core, which most of these fins are just a performance core, and then you've got your higher end ones that have got uses of carbon. So that's all different manufacturing methodologies. But yeah, Futures, strong base, really well, nicely made fins, well researched. Your cant angles built into them. They're available universally across a range of manufacturers. They've not locked their box into just buying their product. They're great to fit. So the foils are really good. You've got all the support of the big guys. You've got your, this is Rob Machado keel. You've got the shapers and the riders on board, so you're getting a lot of development with them. Yeah, so that's pretty much most of it. One thing that's probably worth mentioning as well, I don't see it as a problem, but it could be considered a disadvantage to some on Futures over FCS or not. When you have something as big as a keel fin, they have to relieve this base for you to be able to push this down without it going below the level of the glass in the board. So basically a lot of Futures keels will be relieved here. Now I don't see that's not a problem to me, because it actually gives them a bit of a looser feel for the size of the fin, but it does mean that you're essentially losing some of that fin base off the back end of the fin. But to be honest, even on the FCS2, like, okay, it's flat to the bottom of the board roughly, but it's not connected, and your tail rocker's probably curving away from it anyway. So it's kind of similar, but it's just another thing to mention. I don't see it as a problem at all. Hopefully I've not missed anything, because I did run out of storage halfway through that video once I'd done a nice job of getting everything all even. So guys, whilst I was making this video, it's actually made me come to realise something quite important. If you've got a board that's, say, I don't know, like a Seaside or a Psycho Nitro or something that's kind of borderline, and it could be a thruster and it could be a keel fin and it could be a 2+1. If you've got a Futures fin system with Futures boxes, your fin having the cant built into it would actually help you achieve the correct cant regardless of your fin box. So this is actually pretty important. So if you like to flick around with a lot of fins, if you swap from this thruster to this keel in an FCS, you're probably going to end up with 9 degrees of cant. Whereas if you go with Futures, your keel fin is probably going to have 2 or 3 degrees of cant, and your normal thruster side fin is going to have 6 or 7. So that's really important. So if you actually have a small wave board, you're going to achieve a lot more of the desired effect if you swap to like a keel or a quad or a twin and stabilizer, because they'll actually come more upright and less cant. I mean, the fin position will still not be perfectly correct, because twins and keels should be much further back than thrusters, but it will solve the problem of, you imagine this keel fin, like there's the angle and it's pretty shallow. If you've got a FCS box, it's going to be sat like somewhere over here. So yeah, and that's a pretty big point to consider that I didn't actually think about and realize until I was making this review. So thought about add that in for you. Cheers, guys. But yeah, that's the fin systems, the advantages and disadvantages. Sorry, it's a bit of a long one. Hopefully, I've really helped you guys and covered a lot of the things, a lot of the questions that were in your minds, and give you some clarity, or helped you made a decision into what you might like for your next board, or whether you actually think, okay, I might have both, or whether you think you lean more towards a Futures or a FCS, depending on whether you're going for a keel or a performance setup. But yeah, both great systems, nothing wrong with either of them. And yeah, hopefully that helps you guys, and thanks for watching as always. Also, guys, if you could like and subscribe, that'd be great. I always forget to say it, but it helps the channel be more visible. And if you are interested in some of the boards I'm making myself, or you want to see pictures of what I'm up to, I actually have an Instagram account as well, which is go_surf_nz, I believe. But you'll find me on Instagram basically, so that can also be a good place to DM me if you want to ask anything. But yeah, so the Instagram is go_surf_nz, and if you're interested in the stuff that I make myself, I actually post quite a lot of pictures as I'm going through a build process, or as I'm making a board, so may or may not be interesting to you. But yeah, thanks for your support, and catch you soon. Cheers. So one little side note on the fin cant, some people would argue that your FCS has got a slight bit of extra tunability, because it's the same principle, but without that flange that sits on the top, it's probably a little bit more possible to lower or raise this by a degree or two. But again, that means that you've locked the cant into the board, whereas the Futures, the cants change on some of the fins, but as a shaper, it might be a little bit easier to achieve the exact fin cant numbers you want, and know that they're always going to be like that with whatever fins get put in them with FCS. So it just presents another side to that same argument basically.